Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the second live session interaction class for programming in C++. We are at the fag end of the course. So, I am hoping that you all have already been able to master much of it, and you have been aggressively solving the assignments and other problems. So, in this session we will discuss about a number of queries that were raised by some of you, and some of the queries that have been doing rounds in the forum and was found to be confusing, or there was some error from our side. So, those things we will discuss. Our course TA Himadri is also here online. He will respond to your chat queries and pick up something which needs a bigger discussion. So, let us get started. In terms of the overview of C, Abhiraj Gupta, you just asked for array concepts. We have repeatedly told that the questions have to be very specific. We cannot certainly go over what has already been discussed in the video and discuss it again in 1 hour, that we cannot do justice to that. So, please ask specific question, otherwise go over those modules again. Next is in terms of function overloading. The question is this is actually from week 2 assignment 2. So, these two functions can they be overloaded simultaneously? Certainly not, because if I have a particular instantiation like myfunc5, the compiler would not know whether it should go here or it should go here. I think the confusion was created from the question that was asked on it in the assignment, and I found after from this that you are right, Tushar. This option A, which means that whether 2 and 5 can be overloaded together, is not a correct option. So, this question is actually invalid. So, Himadri will take care of it and this will be re-evaluated. So, there is nothing to technically answer on here. Okay. So, let us move on to this, which is an interesting question from Shubhodip Patro, who asks explain two scenarios where return by reference is useful. So, for everybody's consumption, there are two kinds of returns, like there are two kinds of call. You can call by value, where the actual parameter is copied to the formal parameter, and there is call by reference, where the reference to the actual parameter is set to the formal parameter. So, if I do call by reference, the changes do come back. Similarly, return can happen by value or by reference. So, Shubhodev is asking what is the need for having return by reference, and it is very useful. I mean, it's I mean, quite a few things in C++ would not have been possible if we did not have this return by reference. So, certainly first of all, I mean, the most common scenario would be variety of different operator overloading scenarios. So, let us think about suppose I have some class, I mean, just arbitrarily I am saying class A, and you have two objects A and B, and we want to write this A assigned B. Now, we know that if we write A assigned B, then according to operator overloading, this we will have to write for this code to be meaningful, we have to write an operator assignment, copy assignment operator for this class. So, this copy assignment operator would look something like this. This is specifically we are showing for string. So, now if I write for A assigned B, then what we are saying is operator assignment. So, on A, the object operator assignment has to get invoked, and it should take B as parameter. So, it is quite obviously as to the input to this operator, the formal parameter has to be of the type that is B, which in this case is string. So, you have string and you do not want another copy to happen when you pass this parameter. So, you pass it as a reference. you do not want the source B to be changed. So, therefore, it is a constant reference. So, this is the input parameter side. Now, the question is what should it return? Now, it should return something. Now, whether the question is it enough that I can just I am trying to do this kind of assignment. So, if I take component wise values from B and put that to A, for example, what component does it have? It has these two components, these two data members str and len. So, if I set the str and len of the object A on which this call has happened, taking values from what is given in B. So, in this case it is S. So, I have taken the str and set it here, taken the len and set it here. Then A becomes a copy of B, right. So, the basic copy part gets done here in this part, right. So, that should be fine. Now, the question is what do I want to return? For example, for this could I have returned void? For example, instead of here could I just return void? Because here already the copy has happened, the copy assignment has happened, the actual effect that you want has already taken care of. The answer to that question is no, because when you overload operators, then you must in C++ you must keep the basic semantic context of that operator. So, what does that mean? That if I have a copy assignment operator, then it can be cascaded, which means that if I had another object C, then I should be able to write C assigned A assigned B. And you know that copy assignment is right associative. So, this actually is this. So, A B is assigned to A and that result is assigned to C. So, which means that A assigned to B, this must also produce a value, it must return a value, it must return something, which will in turn be assigned to C. So, because of this cascading requirement, it is not enough that I can have a void here, because the objective is not only to copy value from B to A, but objective is also return a value which can be further assigned to another object of the same type, like in C here. Now, if that has to happen, then naturally the value that is returned, it should be possible to take that value as an input to the same overloaded operator, because what will happen? C assigned A assigned B is C dot operator assignment of what? A dot operator assignment of B. This is the meaning of this. So, this whole expression A dot operator B must return a kind of value which can go as input to the same operator. Now, you would argue, so this logic can be used to deduce that it cannot be void, it cannot be anything else, it has to be a string. Now, coming to the original question, what if it is not returned by reference, but it is returned by value? That is, instead of being string ampersand, if it is just string, then what will happen? Since it is returning by value, it will have to again, like when you do a call by value, the copy constructor is invoked and a copy is made and that temporary copy goes in here. Similarly, when you return by value, again the copy constructor will be called, a copy will be made and that copy is what will be used in calling the operator assignment on C, and that temporary copy will have to get destroyed. So, this is the additional overhead of making a copy and then destroying a copy in terms of using copy constructor that will be involved if we return by value. Certainly, that is completely wastage, that degrades performance, that can create a lot of other risks, because we do not know what is the effect of doing copy using a copy constructor. That is a separate code. Right? So, using reference you solve that problem. So, what you return is a reference to string. So, when you do, and you can see that what are you returning? You are returning start this. So, the original call was made on A for operator assignment, B came in here as a parameter, and the fields were copied, the allocations and all that were taken care of, and then all these changes have happened in A. So, what you are returning? You are returning, what is this? This is a pointer to A, because on that the call has happened. So, what is start this? A itself. So, you are returning A, and you are returning that as a reference. So, no copies are made, that changed A is now used when you assign the result of A assigned B onto C, and this chaining could continue forever. So, you could not have been able to write this operator if return by reference were not used. So, that is one scenario. You had asked for two scenarios. The other scenario is also equally important, is think about that you want to overload the input output operators for a specific class. So, it is a complex class. Actually, this example is given in the modules, the slide number you can see. Now, you want to write this, so that you would given any data of the complex type, you should be able to write a C out or a C in on that. So, you want to overload those operators. Now, naturally, what could be the input parameters? The input parameter will have to be the stream that you are operating with, that the output stream, and the object that you are dealing with, the object that you want to output. Let us say we are talking about this C out case. So, these two parameters are quite understood. Now, the question is how should you pass the data? Naturally, you will pass the data as a reference and a constant reference, because while you are outputting, you do not expect the data to be changed. In case of input, it will be a non-constant reference, and certainly you will have to pass the stream on which you are outputting. Now, again, if you pass this stream as a value, then the whole stream will have to get copied, there will be a copy constructor. So, you will pass this as a reference. Now, the question is well, should it be a constant reference? The answer is no. Why is it no? Because you are trying to output to that C out. So, if you are trying to output your complex data to C out, you need that C out changes. Now, if you make it const, then the C out cannot change. So, it has to be a non-constant reference. This part is fine. So, this is your input, then you go inside, write this code, you break down this into different data members, format the way you want to print and all that. Now, what should it return? Can it return void? Again the earlier question. No, because like the assignment operator, the output operator can also be changed. I can do C out I can do things like that, where D, C, F, G, all of these are objects of variety of types, for which there is a valid overloaded operator to write it to the output stream. They need not be of the same type, they could be anything of any type, but it just that for that type there must be an output operator available. So, which means that again I should be, and this is left associative. So, if I do C out D, then C out E, it basically means this. So, the result of having done the output of D on C out has to be C out itself, so that E can be output there again. So, that is how this syntax has been formed. So, that clearly tells me that my output will have to be the O stream, and if the output is O stream, can it be a return by value? If it is a return by value, again what will happen? What will be returned is a copy of the C out. and E will write to that copy which is not the original C out. So, you will not see where you have seen D, you will not see E there, because this part has returned you a copy of the C out, not the actual C out, and E will be written to that copy. That does not work. I want that same C out which went in for D has to also go in for E. So, what went in has to come out, and that is possible only when I have return by reference. So, I will have return by reference, and you can see. So, what I return is the object that I want to chain through. Right. So, two examples operator overloading scenarios where you would need this. There could be several other examples. Here I have also tried to put some additional food for thought as to there could be several places where using return by reference would not be a good thing. For example, in terms of operator overloading itself, suppose you want to overload the operator addition plus for your class, and it is a binary operator. So, you are writing a friend function for operator plus, which takes 2 instances of your class, and obviously, you would want instances not to be changed, not to be copied, all that. So, the instances will be passed to this overloaded function by constant reference. That part is clear. Now, the question is, what do you return? Can you return a reference? Can you return a by value? Can you return a pointer, and so on? Now, the question is, suppose you let us in this case assume that you are returning a reference. So, your scenario is you have my class objects A, B, C, and you are trying to write C gets A plus B, right. So, A plus B is whatever your class is, whatever your logic for addition is. Now, the question is, what would you return from this? When you write the code for this, what did you write for return? Now, unlike the earlier examples of overloading assignment or overloading the output operator or the input operator, the what you return was clear, that object existed. But if we are adding A with B, it is neither object A nor object B. The two parameters that you have passed, A and B, are not what are expected to return as a result. A result is a new object, the object that did not exist. So, most likely within this body of the operator plus, you will define some my class T, and you will do some T this component wise, you do some computation to define what this component should be. So, when you return, would you return this T? If you return this T, you will have serious consequences, serious problems, breakages, because this T is a local variable of your function. So, when the operator, after having done this plus operation, when the control comes back at this point, this T variable T, which was local to this operator function, is already out of scope. It is gone out of the stack frame. So, it is to be considered garbage now. But as a reference, you are holding on the address that this T had. So, you are holding on to an address of an object which has already died, disaster. So, you can never, and this is a very basic principle, that you can never return the reference to an object which is local, because as soon as you return, that local object is gone, the local object, the scope of that function is over, the stack frame is gone. So, the reference becomes immediately as soon as you return, it becomes a bad one. So, this example tells you that you cannot do this. You can try other things, like you can check whether you can return a pointer. So, instead of doing my class T, can you do my class star PT new my class, that is, can you dynamically create that object, create a temporary object, and then in PTA you do all this addition from using members of A and B and create that, and you then return this pointer. Now, you know if it is a dynamically created object, then it is not limited by the automatic scoping of the function. So, it will remain. one good solution. You have two problems. One is the result of this A plus B is no more of type my class, it is of type my class star. So, you cannot do C assigned A plus B will not work, you will have to do C assigned star A plus B, because now you need the object to be assigned to C, which breaks your syntax. This is not what you wanted to write. The other issue is, since this has been allocated, so you have to have certain appropriate point where you should be able to deallocate that, you should be able to call delete on this. Who calls the delete? How do you call the delete? Because you have got this object assigned, the moment this has happened, you have lost that pointer which was set with the newly allocated, dynamically allocated instance of my class. So, this does not work. What works? There is no other way than to locally create the object like this and then return it by value, so that a copy of that will be given to you. So, the original temporary object which was there in the stack frame of the operator plus overloaded function will get destroyed, but the return will bring you a copy through copy construction, which is what will be assigned to C. So, the learning that we take in terms of returning by reference and by value is, if basic broad thumb rule, there could be specific situations to look at with depth. The broad thumb rule is, if I am returning an object which already exists in the sense that is valid beyond the return of this function, the function that I am actually coding. If the object is a valid object that exists and is valid beyond the lifetime of this function, then I should return by reference, otherwise I should return by value, and in every case this judgment will have to be judiciously executed. So, thanks to Shubhodip for raising this issue. It was a little bit of an elaborate answer, but that is what the considerations of returning by reference. Operator overloading, I do not understand function pointers, operator overloading and dynamic allocation. Raja Gurunathan, I am really sorry, we are so close to the examination, and if you are now finding out that you do not understand function pointers and operator overloading, well, start really burning the midnight oil and go through these modules repeatedly once again, couple of times again. How do I overload operator output and array operator? Operator output in the previous example Shubhodip I have already shown. So, you know that. Array operator, let me just show it to you. So, how do you, so what is this operator? Actually, there are more depths to that. So, let me just show you one. Say this array operator which says a given, so that the operator looks like this, operator array indexing. So, what will it take? It will take the index, and what will it return? It will return you the address, right, where this value is. So, to overload this, you will need to have, certainly your input parameter will always be int, because the index of an array is always int. And what should it return? It will return something which is based on the type of element, because it will give you the element that you have, right. So, that is my return type. So, here my array is ARR that I want to use, it is of type int, that is every element is int. So, I am returning int. Now, why am I returning reference to int? I could have returned int only. Again, the consideration is the object already exists, the array has the elements. So, I do not need to make copies, I can just return that element. That is why I am using a return by reference. Good. Now, what I wanted to do is, when I do this access, so I am just showing one functionality in terms of implementing this operator, is as you know that if you define an array in C or C++, it has a fixed size, a size that you have specified, a size which you can see in terms of putting here is a compile time specification. But neither C nor C++ has a mechanism to check if you are doing an access which is beyond this. So, if it is 10 here, then you are allowed to access ARR 0 to ARR 9. What happens if I access ARR 12? It is an unpredictable result. So, here in C you cannot do anything about it, you will just have to make sure that you call the right index, use the right index. Here what you can do, you can change this operator read, array read, to take care of the fact to decide whether it actually reads a valid element or not. So, what you are doing is, you said, so it has to return that element. So, this is clear, ARR I is what it has to give, where ARR I is the actual array indexing that you do without overloading. But before that, it checks whether in terms of the given size, whether it is beyond. If it is beyond size, it could print some message, but it has to return something. So, here I am using ARR 0 to be returned, because whenever you define an array must have at least one element. So, ARR 0, no matter what size is, ARR 0 has to be always defined. So, this and then I am using it simply as I use any array element, but as I do this, it does not directly do A2, it actually calls this function, which is overloaded. Let us do that. So, this has been filled with AI is filled with I. So, when I do A2 it prints 2, when I do A5 it prints 5, but when I do A12 which is more than 10, this condition becomes true and it prints index out of bounds and gives you ARR 0. So, this is how you can overload that. Of course, this is only one type of array indexing, where the array is in the read mode. If I have things like A2 assigned say 17, now here I would need not the element, but the address of the element. So, what I should get is the address of the element here, so that 17 can be assigned there. So, operator array will have another overloaded version, which is to be used for write, where you actually get that address. So, I will leave that as an exercise for you to find out how to do that. Explain inheritance again. I am sorry Shudipto, that is as you can understand, that is not possible. Go through the module, or if you find it difficult, then you have to come back next time when we run this course. Akhila, frankly this question I just did not understand, it is very confusing. If both classes has no easier relation, I do not know, on one side you are saying multiple inheritance, on the other side you are saying there is no easier relation. So, kindly clarify that question on the forum, I will try to answer that on the forum. Dynamic binding, what is the use of dynamic binding? It has been explained quite in detail in the presentation. What is the use of pure virtual function also has been explained, but I will just again give an outline. Just think about what is written here is, suppose you have a hierarchy of classes. So, here you have say polygon, here you have conics, and within conics you have a circle, you have ellipse, other specialization of polygon could be triangle, this could be quadrilateral and so on. So, I have a hierarchy of classes, and what I want is, I want all of these classes to have a function, say draw, which I can call on that an object of that class, and to be able to draw it. Now, the question is, in terms of concept it is very uniform. I would like to call draw, which will be able to draw it on the screen. But in terms of the actual algorithm, actual code, it will be very different, because the way you draw a circle and the way you draw a quadrilateral or way you draw a triangle are very, very different. And that is the reason we make use of dynamic binding. We say that we will have virtual functions, so that if I have a collection, if I have something like this, where P is an array of pointers to objects which can be pointed by a shape address, but a specific, for example, P 0 could be pointed to a triangle, P 1 could be pointed to a quadrilateral, P 2 could be pointed to a circle, P 3 could be pointed to another triangle, and so on. But because of this hierarchy specialization, I should be able to treat all of them as pointed to shape. And then I want to say that I will just go over a for loop or an iterator, and I will, for every P I, I would like to call draw. Now, if draw is a virtual function, then it can be overridden in each one of these classes appropriately with the code that is required to draw the object of that class. So, here I write one code where I really do not care as to what type of object P I is pointing to, but when I call draw with the P I pointer, it will call the draw of the particular class of which the object belongs. So, for it will when P 0 calls, it calls the draw of triangle, when P 1 calls, it calls the draw of quadrilateral, P 2 calls the draw of circle, and so on. And that precisely is a concept of dynamic binding, because when this code was generated in the compiler, you could not decide whether you want to call triangle : draw or quadrilateral : draw, circle : draw. You are doing it at the runtime. That is why it is dynamic binding clear. Now, the question comes, the draw, for this mechanism to work, draw must be defined at the root, which is shapes. Now, if it is defined into shapes, what is the code that you write for it? If you put a header for a function, you must provide a body for that. What body do you write? If you do not know what shape it is, anything, any shape could be, can you really write a code to be able to draw that shape? It is not possible. So, comes a question that on one side I need the signature of draw to be present in the definition of shape class, so that I can override it as I go below the hierarchy and specify each and every draw function. At the same time, I cannot have the code for draw. That is when we say that the virtual function becomes pure. And when that happens, naturally the shapes class have at least one function where you are saying that I do not know what to do if this function is called, or at least I do not have a complete idea. So, it will be quite impossible to instantiate objects of that class. That is, if I could write shapes S, so that S is an object of type shape, and I have draw. So, I can write S dot draw, because S is a object of type shape, shape has a draw function. I can obviously write S dot draw, but I do not know what is the code for that. I have not been able to figure out the algorithm. So, this call would not be possible. So, that breaks the whole mechanism of objects and member functions. So, what we say is, if the class has at least one pure virtual function, that could be more, but if it has got at least one pure virtual function, then you cannot create objects of that class, and it is called the abstract base class. So, shape here will become an abstract base class. So, that is the basic, this uniformity, this ability to handle objects of a wide range of different classes which belong to the same polymorphic hierarchy. This mechanism would not have worked unless we had dynamic binding, unless we had pure virtual functions, unless we had runtime dispatch, and that is the reason C++ has all of that. Please go through the slides once or couple of times more, so that you can understand this concept better, because this is one of the key concepts of C++. Okay, constructor and destructor. Can I use constructor initialize this in each and every case, even if it is harmful to initialize the variable within the construct, if it is not harmful to the question here is the recommendation is different way, that all data members of a class must be initialized with the initialization. So, if I have I will just quickly write down class A, I have int x, I have int y, etc., and I am writing the constructor for class A. So, I have int A, I have int b. So, I have two choices, right. I can do the initializer list, or I can actually do nothing here and then make assignments to here, right. Now, this always is preferred, this is not the way to do. Two reasons. One is, even though we say this is a constructor, the constructor has two parts. One part is where the construction is actually happening and the data members are getting initialized. So, the memory has been laid out and the values of every field is being initialized. Then you come to this curly brace, which is the opening scope of the constructor body. At this point, please keep this in mind, that at this point the object has got constructed, the construction process is over and the object is ready to be used. That is the meaning of C++ constructor. So, this is when the object has already become ready. After that, the body is to be used if you have to do some additional things after the construction has happened, but the basic construction is already over. Construction is a process of acquiring the memory which you have appropriately got based on whether it is automatic variable or it is dynamically created, whatever, and then it is a process of actually filling up. It could be the process of calling your base class constructors, so that also completes the construction process, and then it is the process of filling up each and every, initializing each and every data member of your class. So, every data member must be initialized. When you do this, then what happens is, when the control reaches this point, it has already finished the construction of the object. You did not specify anything in terms of how should x and y be initialized. So, it did not have, a compiler had no clue. So, what will the compiler do? Compiler put some garbage value. So, the initialization has again happened, you are not initializing anymore, because you have already, the initialization is already over when you have reached this point and it has been initialized with garbage. Now, you are making a fresh assignment to these. Apparently, it looks logically they are same, but in actual execution terms they are not the same. So, this is the basic difference in the mechanism. Now, the question is, are there reasons that other than this, in principle think that it is always required to initialize the object before you start using it, which you can start doing as soon as you are within the body of the constructor. Other than this principle thing, are there fundamental reasons? There are a couple of fundamental reasons also. For example, let us consider that this particular variable int I is const int I. If it is a constant I, this code itself will not compile, because it is a constant variable, constant data member. So, there is no way that you can make assignments to it, you cannot change that. So, the only way you can set the initial value to that is through the initialization list. There is no other way to do this. It is no other way. So, if you have const data members, you will have to use the initialization list anyway. So, that is it is good to keep that practice. Other could be, suppose I have, I mean taking again, suppose I have certain dynamically allocated array in my class. So, I have one variable len, and then I have char star str. Right. So, what will this allocation mean? This initialization will mean that after the constructor I will have len initialized with L, str initialized with the dynamic allocation. So, this will be say something like str dope of original, but how can you do the copy? You need this allocation to be done. For doing this allocation, you need the value of the length. Unless you know the length, you cannot allocate. Now, when you write as a code here, it is you can initialize, you can assign to len first and do the str next, which actually uses len, or you could write it as str is first allocated and then len is set. Now, obviously, this code will work, this code will not, because str needs the value of len. So, it matters as to in which order you do the initialization of the data members, it may matter for that. Now, if you write them in the initialization list, then you could again your question will be that if such a confusion can happen in terms of writing it as assignments in the body, what happens in case of the initialization? In case of writing len initialized then str initialized, I could also write str initialized and len initialized, that also is possible. Now, that is where lies the beauty of the design of the constructor, is that no matter in which order you write them in the initialization list, the order in which they are executed is decided by the order given in the body of the class. So, even though I may write str initialization first and len initialization next, if in the top to bottom order of the data members in the class len happens first, then this will happen first before str will happen, ensuring that it will always give me the correct result. Now, for a class I may have multiple different constructors, overloaded constructors, all of them will need this initialization to be done, but they may have been written at different times, they may have been written by different programmers. So, it is very possible that in terms of the order of initializing this data members, some of the programmers will make an error. But if you strictly use initialization list, then it would not matter, because if the original designer has set the order in the right manner in which they must be filled up, then in the initialization list you have the freedom of writing them in any way whatsoever, the compiler will set the right order. But if you do that in terms of the assignments, it matters as to what you have actually written. So, you are very likely to have errors. So, there are several reasons that I have explained as to why you must use initialization list in the constructor and not make fresh assignment to the variables after they have been initialized with garbage before entering the constructor body. How can I overload a destructor? If not, then why? The question is, why do you want to overload a destructor? The destruction is a process by which you are wrapping up. So, when you are wrapping up, why are you concerned as to why you need two different ways to do that? Do you mean to say that you would want two different destructors because your class has two different constructors. So, for constructor 1 you need a destructor 1, for constructor 2 you need a destructor 2, right. Let us assume that that is what is possible. Now, there is that contradicts several of the principles. One is a destruction can happen automatically, a construction cannot happen automatically. The construction is always result of certain code that the user has written, whether you have written it in terms of implicitly by putting it in the automatic scope or in the global scope, or by doing a new on that class, but you have written some code. So, it is possible that you provide different overloaded parameters to distinguish between the different constructors that may have. That is not true for the destructor. Think about objects in the, you have 3 objects of the same class constructed by 3 different constructors, but when the destruction happens you never write the destructor call. The destructor call is automatic, the compiler is doing that. So, how will the compiler know? That is the reason the destructor is not allowed any parameter, because in general, why should I say in general, as a principle you should never be calling the destructor. No decent programming will require that you call the destructor yourself. It should happen automatically, either through the automatic scope or through invoking the delete operator for a dynamically created object and so on. So, destructor cannot have any parameter. If it does not have a parameter, naturally it does not have any scope to overload, because overloading is done in terms of the parameter. So, it is not, I mean you can see that the way the destructors are the purpose that the destructor serves makes it imperative that you cannot overload it. You should not require to overload it. Also, the question is, how do you know you have got an object passed by reference through your caller function and you are trying to do destruction of that object? How do you know how it was constructed? So, the whole principle is construction may be specialized, because it depends on what, based on which parameters I am creating the object, but the destruction, the death is uniform. Every object has to go to the same crematorium in the same way, right. So, that is the basic reason. How can I make a copy of binary tiered linked list in C++? How can I effectively use copy constructor in both these cases? So, it is basically a coding question. I do not think you would have required to ask this question, but since you did. So, in case of these we have shown some prototype implementation using the classes like nodes and so on. Right. So, I do not think I will go through this code, you can read and convince yourself. This is again a similar code for copying linked lists. Can you explain STL again? No, sorry Sanket, I cannot, because it is just too huge. Please ask a specific question. In short, STL or is a template, standard template library, is a design of classes and some functions and some constants, which is done by the C++ standard, so that every C++ installation will have that. And much of it is uses the template notion, though not everything in STL is template, but much of it is uses template notion, so that they can be used for with any of the valid types that you have in your program. And templates are the one of the, I should not say one of them, templates are the most powerful mechanism of C++, which makes it really competitive against every other language. So, the container templates, the iterated templates, the stream templates, all these you must master well. Shubhadeep Patre again, consider two code snippets below for printing. Is there any advantage of one versus the other? I mean, I can see only one difference. In one you are using a post operate post increment and pre increment. The question always is, if you have to increment, just increment, always use pre increment. It does not matter whether this code or any other code, because if your idea is, if you have x and you want to do this, always use plus plus x, because the moment you do x plus plus, then there is a lot more computation that the system has to do, because it not only has to do this, but it also has to make a temporary copy of x, so that that copy can be returned. And that now, in the context where you are just doing the increment like in here, you are not making use of the return value, you are just creating the side effect in the ITR iterator. So, it should not use the post increment in no context where you are just where you are not using the return value or the result of the expression or the value of the expression plus plus. If you are not using that, never use post increment, always use pre increment, that is more efficient, otherwise functionally they are same. Will a vector be more efficient if elements are inserted? Well, the question is vector, what is a vector? Vector is a generalization of an array. So, vector is not primarily meant for insert delete, that is not, insert remove is not the, in terms of a data structure, insert delete is not what vectors are meant for. They are meant to be arrays, the arrays which are generalized, so that you can at the runtime you can change their size, which you cannot do for a simple C array. And vectors are those on which iterators work very efficiently. So, they can be used very effectively in several STL algorithms. So, that is the basic purpose. Do not look at vectors, I mean it is of any STL component, if you or any container, if you have 20 methods, it does not mean that all of these methods are to be used in the application programming. Some of the methods are given, so that you can actually write the internal code in an efficient way. So, well, you can do insert remove at the back end of a vector, but normally you would not be doing that. Normally you would resize and just use it as an array. Now, well, when do you need it? When your incrementally new elements are coming in and you cannot set a target as to what should be the new size of that vector, but that has risks, because every time you do that, the system has to take a judgment as to whether it should allocate only one additional location or 10 additional locations or 20 additional locations, because it does not know how many additional you will need, how many more inserts you will do. So, more often the compilers use a doubling strategy, that when it is full and you are doing another insert, it will make the size double and then copy the whole thing. Then when that gets filled up, it will make the size. So, you started with the size 10, the 11th element you insert, the size becomes 20, the 21st element you try to insert, the size becomes 40, 41st you insert, the size becomes 80 and so on. But then you may not really require that much. So, there is a cost to that, but only in that context you will use insert remove kind of, remove is while you are shrinking back, but normally you should just actually resize and use a vector after that. Now, naturally it has to happen in the back end, because the left end of the or the front end of the vector is fixed, because that is index 0. So, certainly you cannot change that. What is iterator invalidation? Iterator invalidation, as the name suggests, when the iterator becomes invalid. So, you have taken say if you think in terms of a say a vector, since we are talking about vector. So, you have taken a vector, you have defined an iterator. So, it has set what is the beginning iterator, as you know, is a every iterator is a left close right open interval. So, it has this is where it starts. So, this is your structure, this is where your beginning is and this is where your end is one beyond the last position. Now, if after that you have made certain changes here, after that you have, for example, if you have deleted one element, then naturally this iterator cannot work with the same information with which it was created. So, it becomes an invalid iterator, and that process is called iterator invalidation. Release versus debug build is the debug build is one that is used as a development type, on which the debuggers work that help you have watch on at the runtime of different variable values and so on, single step and all that. Release is a build which is for the final execution. So, release is optimized severely, it does not allow many of the debug things to happen. For example, several statements in the program might actually disappear in a release build, because they are just optimized. For example, you have called a function with a constant value, you will find that that function has disappeared, that function call altogether has disappeared, because since the parameter was constant, the compiler has actually computed that. So, all those things will happen. The code might move, I mean compiler moves the code pretty much, I mean later code might come earlier, earlier code might go later, as long as logically it means the same thing, compiler make all these changes, those all happen in the release build. So, that is a basic difference. There are a lot more of details to be really understood in this. For the second part, I do not know your name, thank you. We actually checked, I am sorry that there is a typo. So, this code as such does not compile. So, there is a typo, and we will correct and publish it in the forum. Well, as you know, a static function cannot be declared const. This is see a static function cannot be declared const, but the example that you have given as a posing as a counter example is completely wrong, because see I will just go to the next one where I illustrate this. So, you can I am sorry, where are you going? One second. Here. So, here if you look at suppose you have written this, I mean what you have written is similar to this. So, you have a const, you have the static and a const put here. Now, this is not a constant function, this is a function returning a constant value, returning a constant result. That is very different from a const function. A const function is where you write it after the list of parameters, where you say that this function cannot make changes to the object inside. Static functions do not have an object. So, there is no question of its being const, and if you try this, you will find that this const is basically saying that the reference that it returns is const. So, you can try out this code, you will find that under this context, given that your reference returned is const and reference that I am using here is non const, this will fail, this will refuse to compile. So, this example that you have given is not that of a constant function. This is a function returning a constant reference or returning some constant value. Of course, it does not make sense to return a constant value by value, because if you a value is a copy. So, if you say that I am returning const int, then you have returned something which is a copy. So, what is a const? So, typically const makes sense in the return if you have a reference. So, that is the example I have worked out, but if you try this syntax of defining a const on static, you will get the error that static functions cannot be const, and certainly logically that is the protection model. I think this has been answered well. I do not want to debate on this, we are trying to learn the language, what is the language, how to use the language, how to be effective. So, I do not want to get into the debate of in the finesse of what is purely, for example, is C++ a object oriented language? We can spend hours on that. There are several debates, all experts now agree that it is not, but if I say it is not a object oriented language, most of you will get deeply shocked. That is not what the general belief is. So, we do not want to get into this deep issues of what friend actually is and so on. We must be able to understand the context in which we use, and we must be able to use that. So, whoever Vikash, I would request that it is good that you have raised this, but be happy understanding this. If you want, there is lot more to read on this and understand, and you will find a lot of conflicting views on this, but let us adhere to the common notions and practice and move forward in terms of the programming. These are some of the, I mean, this is just to highlight, these are some of the issues that have come over time in the forum. This is a case of a pure virtual function. Now, a virtual function is pure means that I do not have a definition for that, but it does not mean that I cannot write a body for it. That is kind of a I can write a body for it, because it could be something which is common between all the whole of the hierarchy, and I would not like to write that code all over. So, that can be written, but the only problem that example had is the fact that writing for a pure virtual function, if I provide the body, that cannot be provided within the class according to the standard. So, that was an oversight, and so this particular code will not compile in GCC. Incidentally, it compiles in VC++, but that is not the standard. So, the right way to write this would be to define it as a pure virtual function within the class and outline the body of it if you want to actually provide that. So, this is a clarification that I wanted to provide to you. So, static methods cannot be inherited. See, few things, I mean, if you ask the question, few things you just ask yourself first. The inheritance means specializing from one class to the other. So, there has to be objects relating to that when you inherit, otherwise what sense that inheritance mean? Then it becomes a scoping problem. Now, if you have something which is static, it is not a part of the object, it is a part of the class. So, it has no sense to say that you inherit, because it is not any object's personal property. You inherit what is your personal property, which is the data members and methods of your parent. But when that method is a static one, then we are defining that that method will not have a this pointer, that method is not specific to the object, that method is only specific to the class. So, it is just there to fill in the scope context, so that you can write the same function name in multiple classes without a name clash, but it is not a situation of inheritance at all. So, please keep that in mind, then such questions will not come to your mind. However, there are different details are discussed here. Another question where you raise that why we cannot do this. So, here there is a protected member in the parent, data member in the parent, and you have tried to do the initialization here, and that gives you an error, but if you do it in the body, it does not give you an error. The reason is simple, you can initialize the data members or your base class, you cannot initialize your parent's data members, that is the simple, it is an initialization. So, if your initialization list, you have employee here and you have engineer here. So, when you would come to this point, when would you come to that point to initialize? Before that, your parent object must have got created, your base class object must have got created. So, this particular member which belongs to the base class has already got initialized, maybe with garbage, but you cannot initialize it anymore, because you get to use that, you get to access that after your base class has got created, constructed, and the base class had that particular data member. So, if that has to be initialized, that has to be initialized by the constructor of employee, and you have to pass this name to that constructor, and that constructor has to do that initialization. So, it is not a situation of initialization. So, to remember, always remember that what can you initialize, what is yours, not what is your parent's. Your parent will have to do that. So, your initialization list can have calls to your immediate parent base class constructors and the data members that you have. Okay. So, that is the reason. I think, yeah, thanks for pointing out Narendra, there is a typo in this slide. So, we will correct that. Thanks for pointing out. Null, there has been again a lot of theoretical debate on this. Null in C++ is a manifest constant. Now, doing the finesse of whether you can call it a macro or not, C called everything as a macro. Then C++ settle more hash define. When you are defining a symbol, you call it a constant, a manifest constant, which you are defining, and when you actually have parameters to that, it is more customary to call it macro. Somehow we got fixed it in terms of, again that debate of fine debate of what is this nomenclature and that nomenclature. I think we need to get out of that and actually focus on the programming and logic part of it. Question paper pattern, I think total marks is 100, 40 to 45 questions, 3 hours. There will be 3 sections of 80 marks, covering 80 marks. There was some discussion of having a offline programming test, non-proctored test, but well, for different considerations and objections raised by some of you, we have dropped that idea. Now, in the 4th section, you will have again fill in the blanks kind of questions, which will be of the essay type, short answer type, which will be of 20 marks, which you will have to do. So, this is something which you have discussed already. How to prepare for external examination, is a full length program in final examination? No, we have already, all styles are of assignments that we have to. Do I learn more and do project, and please tell us the future of C++. Future of C++ is very bright. Whether your future grows with that Abhimanyu depends on how well you learn that and practice that. What is the learning of the extra online course, because all subjects are in our syllabus, we start. That is your choice, Hosakulla, whether you want to, I mean, I do not know what is there in your curriculum, but ministry naturally allows you to transfer the credits that you get here, provided your college agrees. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you for appreciating Pushpa. Why can't we use any other programming language for all purposes of C? Yes, every language has its own powers. I talked about that at times. C has a specific purpose, C++ has a specific purpose, and you will have to understand what is the purpose. I mean, when you should be using Python, when you should be using Java, when you should be using C++, they are not. But any program can be written in any language, but the efficacy and everything will not be same. What are some basic pitfalls while practicing C++ concepts? I do not know. I mean, depends on your understanding. It could be even a copy could be a very basic pitfall, but depends on. So, when I get hall tickets, we do not answer administrative question. Basic of C++ to coder, did not understand. In the interactive session, you have told you can develop apps by using C++. Can you tell me how to build an app using? No, this is not a game building course. I mean, look up the net, you will find several of that. Basic concepts of C++ and create logic faster. These questions I will have to skip. Write a program in Python, ask to the Python course. Internship, ask the NPTEL administration. I think we are done here. Anything that needs to be answered? Is this alias is same as which alias? Kashinath asks, is this alias is same as what we do with type def? I do not understand.
Alias means normal alias.
No, there is no alias in C++. Type def is only alias. How can I count the number of objects created for a particular class? It is very simple. You can just create a static member as count, and in the constructor increment that every time the constructor is called. So, anytime you will know how many objects have been created. Cn and Cout are objects of istream respectively. What are the data members of those objects? There are several. This is a huge class. These are basically these are instantiated objects of istream, ostream, which come from iostream. So, you can look up the STL and you will see the whole design, but this is just too complex to discuss over such a mode, and you do not need to get into those, because you need to be a master of lot of other things before you understand those classes, because they go pretty much in the low level. So, you will have to understand the architecture of the system also to be able to say this. how can I create and delete 3D array using new and delete. I mean the way you do 2D, because your array is basically one dimensional. So, the way you do 2 dimensional array is you do an array of arrays. Similarly, 3 dimensional arrays, array of such 2 dimensional arrays. So, you write new and delete for those. How order of data member in the class affect the size of the object related to this. This depends on several things, particularly depends on the alignment issues. So, depending on the alignment, the size might vary, but it is very implementation dependent, Ravi. There cannot be a general answer to how it will show up. So, you will have to really try out and see. Can I write a constructor body in similar style like other functions? Yes, except that it does not have a return type, return value, and it has an initialization list. And a few things that you will have to take care, that a constructor should not destroy the same object and so on. We should not give any delimiters, enter space before string. So, can I say this, where A B are character, A B are character, B is a string. How will the system know that to start taking input for string, because it knows the type. The system will know because it knows the type. So, it does not know when it takes the input, it takes the input blindly, it takes every input as a stream of character, even when you are giving an integer or a double or anything. After taking the input, it parses and decides as to how will it map to the particular type of variable where the value has to go. So, that is where it makes a judgment, and that is where it will make use of the fact that B is a string and it will take strings. Of course, while you give the input, you have to make sure that you do not give blanks in the string, because the input parser assumes blanks to be separate values. So, you have to put them in double quotes. How to learn C++ 17 after this course? Yamina, first you have to learn C++ 11, then 14, then 17. So, 17 is a lot away. So, you can learn C++ 11, that is most of the compilers now support C++ 11 pretty extensively, and there is quite a lot of material. Send me a mail separately, I can send you some references to good material on C++ 11, but that is there. I mean, first make sure that your C++ 9803 that we are doing, you have good expertise on that. Okay. Thank you all very much. This is the first, this is the last interaction that we have before your examination. So, I would like to wish all of you all the very best for your preparation, and please practice as much as you can. Go through the slides, go through the videos as thoroughly as you can, and primarily focus on understanding the concepts over and over again, instead of just looking at this is how something is happening. Try to look at why things are happening in the way they are happening, and that will be easier for you to crack the examination better. I wish you all the very best, and thank you all for your attention. Bye.